She walked into her own bank, dressed casually with no fanfare or entourage. There were no company cars, no tailored suits, no assistants trailing behind her, and certainly no loud introductions. Just a woman in her 40s, in a navy blouse and gray slacks, keys in one hand, a simple leather wallet in the other. To everyone else, she was just another client. Kendra Braxton entered the Monarch Federal branch off Speedway Boulevard in Tucson, Arizona, alone and unannounced. And that, she realized, was exactly how she wanted it. Sometimes you learn the most about a place when no one knows who you are. The bank was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, with a few customers sitting by the windows, scrolling through their phones or filling out deposit slips. Kendra patiently waited behind a man in a neon landscaping shirt, chatting casually with a teller. When her turn came, she approached the counter with a smile. "Good morning. I'd like to make a withdrawal from my personal account," she said. The teller, a young woman named Sherry, nodded and requested Kendra's ID and account number. Kendra handed them over, but before Sherry could proceed, the manager, Stephen Aldridge, emerged from his office. Stephen, in his early 50s, with thin-rimmed glasses and a maroon tie, glanced at Kendra's ID, then back at her with a smile that seemed more forced than genuine. "I'm sorry," he interrupted. "We can't process that withdrawal today." Kendra, confused, blinked. "I don't understand. Is there an issue with my account?" Stephen chuckled lightly, a thin, dismissive sound. "Let's just say we've had incidents. People pretending to be someone they're not, large withdrawals. You know how it is." Kendra stared at him, trying to keep her composure. "My account is in good standing. I can give you additional verification if needed." But instead of asking for it, Stephen leaned casually on the counter, his smirk still intact. "We've had fraud attempts before. No offense, but we don't just take people's word for it. And this ID doesn't look like you." Kendra, holding her calm, tilted her head slightly. "It is me. I'm Kendra Braxton, CEO of this bank." Behind her, a man in line shifted. Sherry glanced up from her terminal, surprised, but Stephen didn't flinch. Instead, he snorted, completely dismissing her statement. "Ma'am, let's not waste each other's time. You'll need to come back with proper verification, or better yet, set an appointment." Kendra stood firm, locking eyes with him. "Stephen," she said calmly, "did you actually check the account before you came over?" Stephen crossed his arms, looking almost smug. "It's procedure. I don't need to look up every ID to know when something feels off." That was the moment when he said, "feels off," as if her very presence raised suspicion. Kendra's face remained neutral, but inside something shifted. She had led this company through 2 mergers, survived a hostile board vote, and turned Monarch Federal into one of the most respected regional banks in the Southwest. And yet, here she was, being treated like a criminal by a man who hadn't bothered to verify anything. But she didn't raise her voice. "Stephen," she said again, "I suggest you check the account now, just to be sure." Instead of doing that, Stephen turned to Sherry, who had gone notably quiet. "Can you take care of this? I've got calls to make," he said, walking back toward his office. Before he could disappear behind his office door, Kendra pulled her phone from her purse, not to yell, not to cause a scene, but to make a single call. What happened next would change the entire atmosphere inside the branch. Stephen's office door clicked shut, but the air in the lobby didn't settle. Sherry shifted uncomfortably behind the glass. Her eyes darted between the monitor and Kendra. The other customers pretended not to listen, but every ear was tuned in. Kendra stood still for a moment, then stepped back from the counter, phone still in hand. "Sherry," she said softly, "do you see the name on that ID?" Sherry hesitated, glancing down before nodding. "Yes, ma'am. Kendra Braxton." Kendra gave her a half smile. "And when you type that name into the system, what do you see?" Sherry's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. A few seconds passed. Her eyes widened as she looked up. I see an executive account. Kendra Braxton, CEO. Kendra paused, glancing toward Stephen's office. "You didn't know I was coming," she said. "I didn't want anyone to know." But now that you see my information matches, is there anything else you need? Before Sherry could respond, Stephen returned, clipboard in hand, clearly unnecessary. Is there still an issue? He asked sharply, his eyes flicking between them. Kendra didn't raise her voice. Sherry pulled up the account, the situation now undeniably clear. Kendra's eyes remained steady on Stephen as she spoke again, her voice calm but carrying the weight of her position. It confirms who I am. You can process the withdrawal now. Stephen gave an exaggerated sigh. Look, lady, he started, but Sherry almost instinctively interrupted. Stephen, she muttered, her voice shaking slightly. I just checked her account. It shows she's the CEO. Stephen's face twitched, then hardened. Oh, so now we're just taking customers' word for it and letting them play dress-up? He snapped, turning to Kendra. You show up here with no assistant, no warning, dressed like you're going grocery shopping, and we're all just supposed to believe you're someone important? There was a sudden silence. The ballpoint pens stopped scratching. Even the man in the neon landscaping shirt put his phone away. Kendra stared at him for a long second, her gaze unwavering, the same way she might look at a quarterly report that didn't add up. I didn't realize my wardrobe needed approval to access my own funds, she replied coolly. Stephen's jaw twitched. It's not about your clothes, it's about protocol. You're not following protocol. Kendra tilted her head slightly, unfazed. You refused to verify my identity before making an assumption. You spoke to me with sarcasm, dismissed a valid ID, and now you're trying to tell me how to do my job. Stephen, still trying to assert control, scoffed. No, I'm trying to see if you're capable of doing it at all. He turned to the other employees, throwing his arms out. Can someone get this woman out of here before she causes a scene? Sherry flinched, and another teller, a man in his 30s named Corey, stood up. But instead of moving, he just studied Kendra's face, really looking at her. Wait a second, Corey muttered. Kendra Braxton. I've seen her before. She gave that speech at the Phoenix conference last summer about ethical banking. That's her. Stephen blinked, slowly processing the realization. Kendra, calm and composed, took a step forward. No raised voice, but every word weighed heavily in the room. I gave that speech because I believe people in positions like yours shape how customers see our institution. You've made it very clear how you see me. Stephen opened his mouth, but Kendra held up a hand. This conversation is over. You had a chance to handle this with dignity. You chose something else. She turned, pressing the call button on her phone. It rang twice before someone answered. Lorna, hi. I need you to patch me through to HR right now. Yes, this location. She ended the call with a finality that sent a chill through the room. Stephen looked at her, unsure whether to scoff or laugh, but the energy in the room had shifted. He wasn't in control anymore. The employees could feel it, even the customers. But Stephen, still unaware, didn't understand just how quickly things were about to spiral. Kendra stayed rooted at the teller window, her phone in hand, eyes fixed on Stephen's office door. There was no yelling, no threats, just a profound silence that wrapped around the room and made everyone stand taller. She could have exploded. She had every reason to. But this wasn't about showing off power. That wasn't her way. In her mind, she remembered her first branch visit as a newly appointed regional director, back when she was still climbing the ladder at Monarch Federal. She'd walked into a location in Albuquerque, and the manager had asked her politely if she was lost. She laughed it off back then, young black woman, sharp suit, fresh off a promotion, used to the raised eyebrows. But she wasn't laughing now. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft ping of an incoming call. She picked it up. Yes, I'm here. No, he doesn't know yet. I'll hold. Stephen had returned to his office but left the door ajar. He stood, arms crossed, still smug, still clinging to the belief that Kendra was bluffing. Corey whispered something to Sherry, who nodded slowly. One of the older customers, a woman with a checkbook and a walking cane, leaned toward Kendra. Sweetheart, you okay? That man was out of line, she said gently. Kendra gave her a soft smile. Thank you. I'm handling it. The phone clicked. Kendra, it's Marlene, HR. I have the regional VP looped in. Kendra took a deep breath. Good. I'm at the Speedway branch in Tucson. I've just been refused withdrawal service. The branch manager questioned my identity, ignored verification, and dismissed me in front of customers. There was silence on the line before Marlene spoke again, her voice colder now. Did he know who you were? I told him twice, Kendra replied, her calm tone now a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere around her. We'll take care of it. Give us 3 minutes. Kendra hung up and turned to face the room once again. Sherry, trying to keep her hands from trembling, cleared her throat. Miss Braxton, do you still want to process the withdrawal? Kendra looked at the young teller, nervous, maybe in her early 20s, probably just trying to survive the day. No, she said gently. Thank you, though. You handled that as best you could. Sherry looked both relieved and guilty. I wasn't sure what to do. You trusted your system. Kendra smiled softly. That's what you're trained to do. But what matters is how you respond when something doesn't make sense, and you responded with curiosity. Stephen emerged again, this time walking slower, still clutching the same clipboard, his face a mask of feigned control. He was still waiting on backup, but Kendra didn't blink. She met his eyes with an unwavering gaze. They're on their way. Stephen chuckled once, a hollow sound. You know, if you really are who you say you are, there are better ways to handle things. You could have called ahead or brought proof. Instead, you show up here like you're setting me up. Kendra's response was steady, without a hint of aggression. That's the thing, she said calmly. I didn't have to set anything up. You did that all on your own. Stephen frowned, unsure whether to take that as an insult or not. But before he could process it, the phone at the branch rang loud enough for everyone to hear. Corey, without hesitation, answered it. Monarch Federal, Speedway Branch, Corey said, his voice even. Yes, 1 moment. He turned to Stephen. It's for you. Stephen took the phone slowly as though it might bite him. Hello? Yes, this is Stephen Aldridge. His eyes flicked to Kendra. Yes, she's still here. He paused, listening. Understood. He hung up the phone and walked back to the middle of the lobby, his gaze shifting uneasily as he realized that the entire room had been watching. Miss Braxton, he said, his voice now slightly unsteady. Can I speak with you privately for a moment? You had your moment, Kendra replied, her tone cutting through his request. Stephen was about to learn that the apology he never planned to give was already too late. For the first time since walking in, Kendra didn't have to say a word. Stephen stood there, visibly trying to regroup, his fingers pressed flat against the clipboard as though it might give him some kind of balance. But whatever confidence he'd entered with was quickly evaporating. Look, he started, attempting to regain some ground. Maybe things got a little tense. It's been a stressful morning and— Stop! Kendra's voice was sharp enough to silence him mid-sentence. A hush fell over the branch. Sherry pretended to focus on her computer while Corey didn't even bother to pretend. The customers stayed frozen in place, all eyes locked on the woman in the navy blouse who hadn't raised her voice once but now commanded the room with 5 simple words. I don't want a speech, she said, her words landing with the finality of a judgment. I want accountability. Stephen flinched, like the word slapped him. He opened his mouth again, but Kendra didn't stop. No, she said firmly. I'm holding you responsible for not following protocol. You refused to check my ID. You ignored system verification. You made it personal. He tried to speak again, but she pressed on, relentless. You didn't stop to think. You didn't ask a single question. You decided what I was based on how I looked, how I spoke, what I wore, and that's not just lazy. It's dangerous. The moment was punctuated by the sound of the front doors opening. 2 figures walked in, both in dark blue suits. One was Marlene from HR, the other was Roland Pierce, the bank's regional VP. They walked directly toward Kendra, bypassing everyone else. Kendra, Roland nodded in quiet acknowledgement. We got here as fast as we could. I appreciate it, Kendra replied, her tone calm but with a razor edge. Roland turned toward Stephen. Let's move to your office. Stephen froze, his face twisting in confusion. Wait, I didn't even know she was coming. She gave no notice. Roland didn't blink. That's not the issue. Stephen looked to Marlene for backup, but she was already shaking her head. "We've reviewed the live branch footage," she said, her voice cool. "There's audio, there's visual, it's very clear." "I was doing my job." Stephen's voice rose now, but Marlene cut him off. "You're not being terminated because she's the CEO," she said firmly. "You're being terminated because you disregarded protocol, showed blatant disrespect, and created an unsafe atmosphere for a client and for your staff." Stephen stood there, stunned, the weight of the reality crashing down on him. Kendra stepped forward then, her presence undeniable. "I could have fired you the second I walked in," she said, her voice steady but packed with purpose. "But I wanted you to hear why this matters." She gestured around the room, her words purposeful. "You see all these people? They didn't know who I was. They watched it happen, watched how you treated someone you didn't think was important." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "That's a reputation stain that doesn't just wash off. It follows us. And I don't let that stain spread." Stephen's shoulders slumped. He looked small now, suddenly unsure of where to stand or what to say. Marlene motioned him gently toward the back office. He didn't argue. As the door clicked shut behind them, a strange silence filled the room. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like the oxygen had shifted. Kendra turned to face the remaining staff, who were watching her closely. "I'll address the team in 5 minutes," she said quietly. "Please wrap up with your customers." Then she walked to the far end of the branch and sat alone in a chair, her calm demeanor not an act of reflection, but a moment before the real conversation would begin. 5 minutes passed, but it felt like 30. No one said much. The customers whispered, some slipping out, others lingering, curious. The staff kept their eyes low, but their ears were sharp. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it. When Kendra stood up and walked to the center of the lobby again, it wasn't as the woman who'd asked for a withdrawal. It was as the leader everyone now recognized. "Can I speak with the staff, please?" she asked, her tone softer now. Sherry, Corey, and the other tellers left their windows and gathered around. Dennis, the assistant branch manager who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, stepped forward. He had watched everything unfold, and now he was ready to speak. "I know this morning was unexpected," Kendra began, her voice steady, "but I want to explain something important, not just about what happened, but why it can't happen again." The staff stood quietly, listening intently. "I've worked in this bank for 23 years, she continued. "I started as an intern, pushing papers, watching managers walk by without so much as a glance. I learned early on that some people only offer respect when they think you've earned it, and others, they don't give it unless you look a certain way." She glanced at Sherry, who looked like she might cry, then turned her eyes to Corey, who stood a little straighter. "When I came in today, I didn't want to be treated like a CEO. I just wanted to see how the branch was running, how people were spoken to, if our mission of integrity was truly alive inside these walls." Her voice didn't shake, but the weight of her words hit everyone in the room. What I saw instead was a manager make a decision based on assumption. No questions, no verification, just judgment. Dennis cleared his throat, stepping in. "Miss Braxton, if I may, some of us knew something felt off, but we weren't sure how to step in without overstepping." "I understand," Kendra said, stepping closer to the group, "and that's why I'm here. It's not just about Stephen, it's about how we respond when we see something going wrong, not just for customers, but for each other." She paused, letting that sink in. That hesitation, that instinct not to overstep. It's what stops change before it even starts. There was silence for a moment, then Corey spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "I've only been here a year," he said, "but I've watched managers ignore people. I didn't want to be that person, but I froze up today. I saw what he was doing to you, and I didn't say anything." Kendra nodded, acknowledging his honesty. "You're saying something now," she replied, her tone reassuring. Sherry, who had been standing quietly, added in a whisper, "I knew something was off too, I just didn't know if backing you up would get me in trouble." "It won't," Kendra assured her. "Speaking up when someone's being mistreated, especially in a place of business, is never a mistake." One of the older tellers, Leonard, adjusted his glasses and looked at Kendra. Honestly, I think we've all seen Stephen act like that before. Just not to someone with authority. Kendra's gaze hardened as she took in his words. Exactly, she said, her voice steady but resolute. And if he talks to a CEO like that, how do you think he treats customers when no one's watching? No one needed to answer. The truth was clear to everyone in the room. Kendra looked around at the group, her eyes scanning each person. Real people, real faces, real voices. These are the heartbeat of this company, not its branding, its buildings, or its ads. She stood taller, projecting the quiet power that had guided her through years of leadership. Moving forward, she continued, there's going to be a formal training session on client interaction and internal respect. I'll personally be sitting in on the first one, because if we can't hold each other accountable in here. She tapped the floor with her heel, the sound cutting through the tension in the room. We've got no business talking about trust out there. A slow ripple of agreement moved through the staff. Heads nodded, shoulders relaxed. The change was palpable. She paused for a moment before adding one last thought, her words soft but impactful. It's not about who you think someone is. It's about treating every person with the same respect you'd give if you knew. The staff meeting ended quietly, with a few handshakes and a couple of lingering questions. No one clocked out early. No one joked on the way back to their desks. The atmosphere in the branch had shifted, and no one would forget the lesson they had just learned. Kendra didn't leave immediately. She walked into the small break room, took a seat at the round table near the vending machine, and pulled out her phone. But she wasn't checking messages. She was thinking, processing, absorbing the weight of what had just unfolded. It wasn't about pride, not today. It was about what could have happened if she hadn't come in dressed like every other customer. If she'd sent an assistant, if she'd worn her CEO badge or walked in flanked by execs, none of it would have happened. Stephen would have smiled, offered her coffee, bent over backward to help, and nothing would have changed. She knew that truth intimately. It was the same truth she had remembered months earlier when the bank had received a letter from a woman in Flagstaff. The customer had written a complaint about a manager who had dismissed her, spoken over her, and refused to honor a check she was trying to deposit for her elderly mother. The case had been marked as resolved after an internal review, with the manager claiming he followed protocol. But something about that letter always stuck with Kendra. It wasn't what he had said. It was how quickly he had decided that she didn't belong there. Back then, Kendra couldn't prove intent. But today, she didn't have to. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. It was Roland, the regional VP. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Yeah," Kendra replied, her voice calm. "Just thinking." He sat across from her, watching her for a moment. "I've worked with you a long time, Kendra. I've never seen you fire someone like that. On the floor, in front of staff, customers." "I didn't plan to," she answered, her voice steady. "Then why today?" Roland asked, his brow furrowed. Kendra leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering. "Because I needed them to see what accountability looks like in real time. No memos, no quiet transfers, just the truth." Roland nodded slowly, understanding. The lesson had been learned, and change was already underway. "Some people upstairs might say you made it personal." Kendra looked at Roland evenly. "It was personal," she replied, her tone unwavering. "And if they don't understand why, it's part of the same problem." He didn't argue, but instead asked something she hadn't expected. "Do you think he would have treated me the same way?" Kendra didn't blink. "You were in a suit, Roland. You're 6'3", and you carry a VP badge. He would have rolled out a red carpet for you." Roland nodded, quietly this time. They sat in silence for a moment. "You think the staff got the message?" he asked, breaking the stillness. Kendra thought about Corey, Sherry, and even Dennis, who had looked genuinely shaken after everything. They did, she said, but more importantly, they felt it, and that stays longer than just a message. Roland stood to leave, then paused. Do you want me to handle the communication to the other branches? Kendra stood too, gathering her things. No, I'll do it myself. You're going to visit them? Not right away, but eventually? She smiled just barely. Might even leave the suit at home again. Roland grinned. Remind me not to be rude to any new walk-ins. She chuckled softly. You're safe. As Roland left the room, Kendra took one last look around the branch. The stale coffee pot, the half-filled bulletin board, the quiet voices beyond the door. This wasn't just a place where money moved. It was a reflection of who they were when no one was watching. Before she stepped out for the day, there was one final thing she needed to say to everyone. She asked for a quick announcement over the internal intercom. Nothing formal, just a few words to wrap up a day that no one in that building would forget. Hi, this is Kendra Braxton. Thank you to all team members for your patience and professionalism this morning. I'll be heading out shortly, but I wanted to say one last thing, just from me to you. She paused for a moment. Meet me in the lobby if you have a moment. It didn't take long. The employees gathered again, some leaning on desks, others standing in the background. Even the security guard came in from outside. It was casual, but every pair of eyes was fixed on her. Kendra stood in front of them, hands loosely clasped, no paper, no script. She wasn't the CEO anymore. She was just a leader speaking to her team. Today could have been a bad dream, she said, her voice steady. Something you tell your spouse about when you get home, or just try to forget entirely. But it's not going to be that because today mattered. A few people shifted their weight, listening deeper now. I walked in this morning not looking like the person you're used to seeing in a company video. And I did it because I needed to know what really happens here when no one's performing, when people believe they're dealing with just a customer. She let that sink in. What I got was the truth, unfiltered. Her voice remained calm, but there was a new weight behind her words. But the truth goes beyond one manager's mistake. The real truth is how all of you responded. Some of you froze, some of you hesitated, and that's human. But now you've seen what silence allows. Kendra paused, and then in a language that felt foreign yet familiar, she added softly, Et j'espère que vous avez aussi vu que peut créer le standing up. She scanned the room, meeting their eyes. Sherry was standing near Corey again, Leonard was looking down at his shoes, and Dennis, the assistant manager, stood with his arms behind his back, his face unreadable. We talk a lot about leadership, Kendra continued, her tone shifting. Most of the time, it sounds like strategy, metrics, meetings. But real leadership looks like holding the door open for a customer who's had a terrible day. It looks like speaking up when a colleague is out of line. It looks like refusing to be a bystander. Her voice softened as she spoke again, the weight of the moment settling in. Sometimes leadership means doing the hard thing in front of everyone, not because it's comfortable, but because people are watching. And you can either teach them fear or teach them courage. She took a breath, letting the silence follow her words. Stephen won't be coming back. That decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary, because one moment like today, if left alone, becomes normal, and normal becomes policy. Kendra smiled, but it wasn't the typical CEO smile from press photos. It was something warmer, more worn in, something that said she'd been where they were, that she was them. I'll be making visits to other branches in the coming months. Not to test anyone, but to listen. And yes, sometimes I'll be dressed just like today. A light ripple of laughter moved through the group. And if any of you ever find yourself in a situation where you're unsure, ask yourself one thing. Would I treat this person the same way if I knew they could walk into a boardroom tomorrow and make a decision about my job? If the answer is no, then it's not the right way to treat them at all. Quiet agreement filled the space. Kendra looked around one last time and then added gently, Thanks for hearing me, and thank you for staying open to learning, because that's how we grow, not just as a bank, but as people. With that, she picked up her purse, offered a nod, and walked out the door. No fanfare, no security detail, just a woman who reminded everyone what respect looks like when the suits are off and the truth is out in the open. Because leadership isn't about who's watching, it's about how you behave when you think no one is. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to our channel for more real-world stories that challenge what we assume, what we accept, and what we believe leadership should look like.